Thanks everyone for coming. This is our development charges stakeholder presentation. We have our consultant here from Watson and Associates, Mr. Byron Tan. He has one of his planner associates online that will be doing a presentation as well. There are sign-in sheets located on the side table, so if you are here in person, please fill in the information. For those that are online, we will be capturing the information as well. So I'll turn it over to Byron now.
Perfect. Thank you, Maria. So, as Maria alluded to, I'm here to provide a presentation on the development charge background study, the process, as well as the implementation piece that we are now undertaking. Just want to provide you a little bit of an overview on the study process, what we've undertaken so far, a little bit of the draft policies that have been included or at least proposed as part of the draft bylaw, and then as well the next steps in terms of timing. We'll talk about the public meeting with council, and then as well the council's consideration of the bylaw, which is anticipated for the end of next month in May. So with that being said, I know we could probably do some formal introductions, but I believe, for now, given the method that we're delivering this presentation, I think there's a little bit of a sporadic spread between, staff and then whoever's attending. So I think if anything, I believe there are sign-in sheets that have been, that is being circulated for everyone to note their name and what organization they represent, and I believe online as well. If we can track who's participating, then at least that assists with any correspondence subsequent to this meeting. So as Maria alluded to, my name is Byron Tan. I'm a manager with Watson and Associates. I've been with the firm for about 11 years, and I've worked on the city's previous development charge studies. Probably the last 3 or 4 bylaws, and we are here today to present the 2024 findings for the DC background study. We'll just go over a few of the items that I'll talk about today. We'll go through the study timelines, again an overview of the legislative changes, give you a little bit of a flavor on the development charge calculations. Again, most of this should be familiar to everyone here that is, with the stakeholders that are participating in the development in the city. However, it is, I would like to provide at least a little bit of a recap for those that, haven't dealt with this in the last, 3 to 5 years. And then finally, after the introductory piece there, I'd like to pass it on to my colleague, Vlad Petrov, who's on the line. He'll provide you with a little bit of the background and the growth forecast work that was undertaken as part of the development charge background study, and that was the basis for our calculations and our proposed capital. Once he goes through his slides, again, maybe we could pause if there's any questions. He can answer them at least at the growth forecast stage and any of the planning numbers. And then subsequent to that, then we'll go into more specific policies, such as what we're including as part of the DC, for the local service policy, some draft exemptions that we're including this round for council's consideration. We'll also provide you a little bit of the summary of the proposed capital program and the development charge rates that have been calculated to date. Please note that all of this is documented within the March 28th development charge background study that was released, just last month. So we wanted to take this opportunity again just to get this feedback from everyone, because this will now be utilized for drafting the bylaw that council will be considering. And then to end off the presentation, we'll provide you a little bit of a comparator of where Thorold will be in terms of a development charge rate, along with all the other municipalities within the region. And as I said, questions here say at the end, but if there is anything pressing that's on the top of your mind, please feel free to either raise your hand online or just mention it here within the room. And I'd be happy to answer it on the fly. However, I have noticed that in past presentations, a question typically is a good segue to a following slide. So, depending on how eager you want to ask the question, feel free to do so. And I believe for anyone that does have a question that's in person, I believe if you could just go to the podium and at least speak through the mic, that way those that are online can also hear what is being asked. So with that being said, I just wanted to go over the timelines, for the background study. We started calculations, meetings, as well as all the policy review, growth forecast work dating back to November of last year in 2023. So it was a little bit of a accelerated process. We started as soon as the study was approved by council for us to be initiated, and really we went through those few months just to gather all of the background information and then really generate a capital listing, as well as doing the service standard analysis during those winter months. Subsequent to that, we did have a council workshop back on March 19th to really keep council apprised of the process, what was happening, what services we were including, and then really just get a little bit of their comments and initial feedback. We did not present any draft rates at that time, as we were still going through some of the calculations. And those calculations, as well as all of the draft policies, have been documented as part of the March 28th background study, which is available online. We are here today, to speak to, the representatives of the development community, as well as any particular stakeholders, just to see if you can get your feedback, particularly with policies that were included as part of the background study, and really have that open dialogue as to anything that you would like to for staff and ourselves to examine as we're leading up to the passage of the bylaw. Subsequent to today, hopefully we get any comments, questions either via email or at least sorted out through this medium. But we are looking to present the background study and have a mandatory public meeting under the Development Charge Act on May 7th. So that is also another opportunity for those to come and speak at council if you so choose. And then lastly, we have the consideration of the bylaw on May 28th. This is in advance of the expiry date of the current bylaw. However, we wanted to provide a little bit of wiggle room in case there were some changes after the fact. But we are slated to, present and have a new bylaw passed by May 28th, which then meets the 60-day deadline of releasing the background study and then having that 60-day minimum period for review in the public before council consider the bylaw. So with that being said, again, the following slides are really more of a recap and review for those of you that are very familiar with development charges. And for those that are new with respect to the DC realm, again, consider this more of a high-level DC 101. So again, the motto really from the province is that development charges through the Development Charges Act really is a revenue tool for municipalities to recover growth-related capital costs related to residential and non-residential developments within municipalities. These costs would be in addition to what you would normally have to provide or construct as part of your localized subdivision works. So, say you're developing a subdivision, municipality or the developers would be responsible for the internal roads, sewers, water mains, etc. So development charges really are more for the benefit of the broader area, or at least external works to an extent possible. And municipalities, again, they're empowered to have development charges. They're not mandatory, but it is something that it is allowable through the Development Charge Act. But you must go through the proper steps prior to you having a bylaw, and that's what we're undertaking as part of this study process. Just a little bit of an overview on the history of DCs. Again, I won't touch too much on this. I didn't mean for this to be a history class, but essentially, development charges are not new. In its previous life, they were lot levies under the Planning Act, and this really started, back in the late 50s. It wasn't until really the late 80s and into the 90s where the province finally introduced an actual Development Charge Act. Which then laid out the rules, policies, as well as the procedures on how to implement a development charge bylaw and what you could truly collect for at the end of the day. Since that time, there's been a number of changes to the Development Charge Act, And you can see there's about 8 bills that have amended the 1997 Act, which is the current legislation that we're working with today. And additionally, for those of you that have been following the province and their releases of news, there was also a recent release under Bill 185, which was released, I believe, about 2 weeks ago now, April 10th. And there are some additional proposed changes to the Development Charge Act that, again, they're not in place yet, but we are monitoring it, and I've actually provided a summary as to what those are. So for those of you here, again, a little bit of a recap on the legislation. Since the passage of the 2019 Development Charge Background Study and Bylaw for the city, there's been a few bills that have been incorporated as part of this study, and as well as the draft bylaw. And those are through Bill 108, for example. This incorporated a number of timing of payment provisions. So if you're a rental housing or institutional developments, if you do get an application, if the city gets an application under that, and there's a DC payable, there would be an installment payment allowed. So rentals and institutionals could pay their DCs over 6 payments, so really over 5 years. And then as well, there's also the nonprofit housing. Again, I'll put an asterisk on that, but for those that would have paid a DC, they would allowed to be paid over 21 installments. Now, there are some exemptions and some nuance to that now, so we'll park that at the moment. There's also a rate freeze for site plan applications and zoning bylaw amendments. So if a development were to come in with the site plan or zoning bylaw amendment, the rates that were determined at the time of the application or amendment would be frozen for up to a period of a prescribed time. As of now, that period is 2 years. Additionally, there's also interest that's allowable now. So with respect to these timing of payment provisions and the rate freeze, municipalities can add interest costs, calculated annually for the most part, to these payment provisions, and it would all then be payable at the time of when each agreement is stipulated on the DC payable. With respect to Bill 138, that was a minor change that just removed installment payments for commercial and industrial. That was included before, then it was removed. And then Bill 197, most of you may be familiar with that, especially through the COVID times, but it narrowed the number of DC eligible services that we could collect for. With respect to the city, it didn't really affect them per se, because most of the services we have included did remain on the list. However, for places like, the region of Niagara where, they collect, say, housing services, that was, removed, in a subsequent bill. So there were certain changes here that, while it limited the number of eligible services, for the purposes of the city, didn't really affect them. There were also some minor changes too, such as the removal of the 10% mandatory deduction and being allowed to utilize any planning horizon for any of the DC eligible services. With respect to Bill 213, that was actually a change to the Universities and Colleges Act. However, there was a notation there where if there were any developments on university lands that received upper levels of funding, again, extending from the colleges now to the universities, there would be an exemption from development charges. Bill 109 just provided for additional reporting requirements, so that's really more for, again, administrative stuff for the finance team here at the city. But the largest ones really came from Bill 23 and Bill 134, and I'll show you that in a moment. So for those of you that have worked through Bill 23 and Bill 134, which really came over the last year and a bit, there were a number of revisions to the Development Charge Act that introduced several exemptions, discounts, phase-ins, etc., that we have incorporated as part of this DC study. So for example, affordable housing, whether it's owned or rental units, there would be an exemption that is allowable as long as it meets the criteria with respect to income. And as well as, so with Bill 134, they provided an outline that the units must be owned or rent that would be considered affordable must be 60%, of the average of the market price or the market rent, and it's the 30% of the income qualifiers for the individuals that are purchasing these homes or renting these homes. So there's a lot more nuance to it now. Again, still to be fleshed out once the regulations and the bulletins are released from the province. Attainable housing exemptions as well. We are writing that within the bylaw. However, these are not in effect yet. So until we get the regulations, we're still waiting for the definitions as well as, what would be constituted as an attainable housing. The other ones here, though, they are already active and they are included as part of the draft bylaw, which again is documented as part of the development charge background study. But that has to do with nonprofit housing exemptions, inclusionary zoning exemptions, additional residential unit exemptions. This one, really was more of a definition change and policy change where, for singles, multiples, they can add up to 2 additional units. And then as well, singles and semis can add up to 2 additional units. Multiples and apartments can add up to 1 additional unit or 1%. Rental housing, you do get a discount now based on the number of bedrooms. So if the whole development or the whole building every unit within the building is purpose-built rentals, you get a discount based on the number of bedrooms. So a 1-bedroom gets 15% on the DC, a 2-bedroom gets a 20%, 3 bedrooms or more get a 25% discount. As I mentioned with Bill 23, they also removed the ability for housing to be included in the DC as an eligible service. Doesn't affect the city. However, from the regional standpoint, they used to collect for housing services. That's now been removed. There's capital cost amendments, removal of studies and land. There's also the mandatory phase-in of the DCs. So as soon as the development charge calculations have been passed by council, day 1 of that bylaw being in effect, the maximum that a municipality can collect for is 80%. So it does drop immediately. And then every year thereafter on the anniversary date, it can go up to 85, 90, 95, and then 100. Now, municipalities are still able to index. So in year 2, while it does go up to 85%, it would be 85% plus, whatever the indexing is at that time. That maximum, so they also introduced a maximum interest rate for installment payments. So historically, municipalities were allowed to include an interest rate policy and determine what that interest rate would be, for those installment payments and rate freeze. Now the province has said there is a cap, and it's basically the average prime rate of the prior quarter plus one percentage point. So that's what that is the maximum amount that could be included. And then finally, again, the bylaw life has been extended from 5 to 10 years. And then there are some other administrative changes as well, allocation of development charge funds and other reporting requirements. Now, before I just leave this page, I would just like to note that, as part of Bill 185, and I'll mention it in the next page, these items here that are in orange with the removal of the studies and the mandatory phase-in, these are currently under review. So this is something that potentially may be a change to the Development Charge Act. It all depends on what the final version of Bill 185 is and what proceeds through royal assent. But for now, as I mentioned, it was released in April 10th, and it is still going through the readings. I believe the last I checked was in 2nd reading. I'm not sure where it is at today, but I'm more than happy to keep everyone informed of the bill as it progresses through the House. But as of right now, some of the changes that are proposed are the inclusion of studies again. So while historically studies were now removed as part of Bill 23, Bill 185 proposes to include them back in. The removal of the mandatory phase-in of the charges has also been put forth as part of the proposed changes, as well as minor amendments to development charge bylaws. So if these proposed changes were to occur, the province has proposed that there could be minor amendments that are allowed through the bylaws to not have to go through the whole public process if it's simply adding in, a clause or removing the phase-in amounts, right? So we don't have to go through the whole public process. Again, these are all still proposed. We're still waiting to see what the final transition area rules are, but this is a cursory reading, of the proposed changes as it stands from April 10th. With respect to the DC rate freeze, for the site plan and zoning bylaw amendments, the province has identified, or at least proposed, to reduce the time frame from 24 months, 2 years, to 18 months. So I believe, again, the thinking there probably is just, if there is a site plan application or zoning bylaw, there should be a building permit that's pulled within, a shorter amount of time. Again, these are all proposed at the end of the day. And then there are some modernization of the public notice requirements. If you read the act, especially the DCA or the the Planning Act, a lot of it still references, newspapers. So again, with the modernization, again, for some municipalities that don't have a local newspaper, this will now allow you to, do, notices perhaps online or through Twitter or some other electronic medium, not necessarily just a local newspaper. And then one of the notes as well is the implementation of the affordable residential unit exemption. So that is something that is potentially on the horizon now. So while we are removing some of these phase-ins and the re-inclusion of the studies, the exemptions with respect to affordable housing potentially may take an effect this summer. So again, this is something that we are monitoring, and we will keep everyone apprised, as this, gets revised or gets updated over the next coming months. So with respect to the overview, again, I won't spend too much time on this, but just to give everyone a little bit of understanding of, where development charges are coming from. At the end of the day, municipalities within Ontario, if there is growth, really, the obstacle, or at least the rationale for, having a DC really is to service new growth, and as such, new population, new employment, and the infrastructure that comes with servicing with that growth forecast. If development charges weren't around, really the only recourse and recoveries for revenues would have to come from rates, property taxes, drawing from existing reserves, user fees, etc. So really development charges are there, again, to balance out some of those increases to the existing community by assisting with, capital costs related to growth for those new users and new infrastructure. The methodology, as summarized here, we've broken it out in 6 steps. If you read the Development Charge Act, there's over 80 clauses and hundreds of subclauses. So really just itemizing it into these 6 steps at a high level. What we do is we work with planning staff and our demographics team to identify the amount, type, and location of growth. And then from there, once we determine the growth forecasts, we then take a look at what are the servicing needs to accommodate that growth. That servicing can come from roads, water, wastewater, parks and rec, etc. It's really just, if for every, person per capita, per employee, what do we need to service them? Number 3, while it looks very similar to number 2, this then drills it down to a capital cost. So we need servicing, we need water. Well, how do we go about doing that? So the capital then says, well, we need a road, maybe, just south of St. David's, or maybe then, we need a water main. Or maybe in this case, we need, parks and recreation. So does that come in the form of a playground? Does it come in the form of an arena? So the capital really is just more to inform what the servicing, is that's required to accommodate the growth. Once we determine the capital costs, then we have a number of deductions, again, as stipulated by the Development Charge Act. If there's any grants, subsidies, or other contributions, whether it comes from the region, other parties, the feds, or even yourselves as the development community, those would be reduced from the calculations. We then go through each capital item to determine the benefit to existing development. So if there are any benefits to the existing community as a result of an upgrade or a life cycle asset management requirement, then those costs are netted off as well, because that's not growth. That is more so to take care of an existing. And then we take a look at your 15-year historical service standard. So for those that are familiar with development charges, for all services except for water, wastewater, storm, we have to do a 15-year historical inventory because the act essentially says, what you want to collect in the future can be no higher than the average you've collected in the past. So we do this mathematical exercise to determine the average level of service, and we forward project that to the growth forecast. So we are limited to a cap or a ceiling, I should say, for these other services, which in the city's case would be services related to a highway, which is really your roads, public works, etc., library, and parks and recreation, and fire. And then lastly, the last deduction then would be reserve funds. So if we've collected, development charges from one bylaw to the next, and the municipality has, a surplus of reserve funds, then those amounts then get deducted as well from the capital program. Alternatively, if there are any deficits, those should be allowed then to be included as a recovery because then the municipality must have, invested ahead of time, ahead of development charges being collected. So with that being said, once we net off all of those deductions, we then get a net cost, which we then allocate between residential and non-residential growth. Typically, it's based on population to employment as a ratio, but there are other measures as well that could be utilized. And then we take that growth related costs and divide it by the forecast. So the residential costs divided by the residential population growth, non-res divided by, say, the square footage of the potential developments within the non-residential sector to get your development charges. As I said, what we have reviewed as part of the city's background study for this round is water, wastewater, your roads, public works, etc. That's all under the services related to a highway, fire protection, library, and parks and recreation. And at this point in time, I'd like to pass it on to Vlad to present the growth forecast and what we utilize as our assumptions as part of the development charge study.
Great, thank you, Byron. So my name's Vlad Petrov, and with Watson, and as Byron already mentioned, as part of the BC growth forecast and in accordance with the Development Charge Act, we need to identify the anticipated amount, type, and location of development for the city of Thorold. So as part of the DC background study, we undertook a detailed update of the city of Thorold's growth forecast in collaboration with the city staff for the 2024 DC. And the growth forecast provides the anticipated development that'll be required to provide services over a shorter term forecast period, which we are aligning to the Niagara Region official plan growth forecast, and over a longer term growth forecast period, which is essentially the urban build-out growth forecast time horizon, which is based on growth of potential within the city's designated urban areas. And really, the updated forecast reflects the anticipated demand for new housing in addition to non-residential development within the city, and the servicing and capital needs that will be, and informs the servicing and capital needs that's required to accommodate that growth identified through the forecast. Okay, and if we go to the next slide. So this figure illustrates the population forecast for the city of Thorold from where the city was historically in 2011 at 17,900 people to where we are today as of 2024 at 29,300 people. And then where we're forecasting where we will be under the Niagara Region official plan forecast for the city, in addition to the urban build-out growth forecast. So as we can see in the figure, in the first growth forecast period, aligning to the Niagara Region official plan forecast, we are growing by 9,400 people from today to then, reaching a population of 38,700. And from today to the urban build-out growth forecast period, we are growing by 22,000 people to reach a population of 51,300 people. And when we were putting this growth forecast together, we really looked at what the recent growth trends have been within the city, as well as the strong growth that's anticipated to occur within Thorold as well. That's identified through the active development applications. And we also assess what the growth potential is on those vacant designated lands within the urban area that don't have active applications in it. And this includes all the areas within the city, such as, but not limited to, the Rolling Meadows secondary plan area, the Port Robinson Westlands, growth in Allenburg, as well as the downtown built-up area, among the other urban areas, as well as the rural area as well, which a small amount of growth is anticipated for. If we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So as mentioned, for the purposes of the DC forecast, we have a shorter term growth forecast period from today to the Niagara Region's official planned growth forecast. In the longer term, that really builds out the currently designated urban lands within the city. And this table illustrates what the population, housing, employment, and gross floor area growth forecast is over those two time horizons. So in the middle column, we can see that over the shorter term growth forecast period, the city is forecast to grow by 9,400 people, 4,300 housing units, 3,700 employees, including work at home and no fixed place of work jobs. And in addition to that, you would have your standard DC non-residential categories such as industrial, commercial, and institutional development as well. And then next, we can see over the next 10 years, the industrial, commercial, and institutional employment is forecast to increase by 2,800 jobs. And for this column, we're excluding work at home and no fixed place of work jobs because they don't generate a need for new floor space development, and because for work at home employment, their needs for services have already been captured on the residential side of the growth forecast. So we see over the next 10 years, those 2,800 ICI jobs translate to just over 1.9 million square feet of new non-residential gross floor area. And then if we look to the column on the very right, this is showing what the growth forecast is from today to the urban build-out. And under this longer term growth forecast period, the population is increasing by 22,000 people. The housing units are increasing by 9,500 units. Total employment, including ICI, work at home, and no fixed place of work, is increasing by 8,000 jobs. And when we look at only ICI employment, that translates to an increase of 6,100 jobs, or 4.3 million new square feet of non-residential gross floor area. If we go to the next slide, thank you. So this slide shows the housing forecast in a bit more detail. So what we see here is that over the next 10 years, the city is forecast to increase by 4,300 households, and to the urban build-out, it's forecast to grow by 9,500 households. And within that long-term growth forecast period, the housing mix is forecast to be comprised of 31% low-density households, which really are your singles and semis. 45% is forecast to be comprised of multiples, which are really your townhomes, apartments and duplexes, and back-to-back towns. And then 24% of future housing growth to build out is forecast to be comprised of apartments, which really are your stacked townhomes and then your traditional apartments that have less than 5 stories and more than 5 stories, in addition to some secondary units as well. And in terms of the DC growth forecast, in the background study, we do have an allocation specifically for the Rolling Meadows secondary plan area. And just for background, approximately 47% of the future housing growth is forecast to be within the Rolling Meadows secondary plan area. And if we go to the last slide, thank you. And this just provides a bit more in-depth detail on the non-residential growth forecast. So we can, as we see in the table, from today to the urban build-out period, we're adding 8,000 total jobs, which includes your ICI, industrial, commercial, and institutional jobs, in addition to work at home and no fixed place of work. And when we exclude work at home and no fixed place of work, so really just the employment sectors that generate a need for new gross floor area development, that results in an increase of 6,100 jobs and 4.3 million square feet of new non-residential gross floor area to build out. And over the shorter term growth forecast period, where the city is forecast to add just over 1.9 million square feet of new non-residential floor space. And when we look at growth over the long-term period to the urban build-out, we can see that of that 4.3 million square feet that is forecast, that approximately 47% of it, or just over 2 million square feet, are in the industrial sector, 27%, or just under 1.2 million square feet, are in the commercial population-related sector, and that 26% of future non-residential floor space, or approximately 1.1 million square feet of non-residential development, would be within the institutional sector. And that would bring us to the end of the growth forecast that was used for the purposes of the City of Thorold's 2024 Development Charge Background Study.
So I guess with that, just maybe just pause for a second if there's any questions on the growth forecast side. All right. All right, well, seeing none, we'll continue on with the presentation. So again, as part of the development charge study, we do include a local service policy document, and this is appended to the background study. Again, just for those, as a reminder, a local service policy, again, this is a document that we do include in order so that we don't, so that we conform with Section 59.1 of the Act, which essentially states the no additional levies clause. So the local service policy is really meant to lay out the foundation as to what would be included within the DC in terms of capital versus what would be required by developers, as part of their development agreements, or again, their, the site-specific works that are within their subdivisions. With that being said, I mean, most of the items that are considered as part of the local service policy includes, roads, intersection improvements, traffic signals, street lights, maybe bike routes, bike lanes, pathways, noise abatement measures, water, wastewater, stormwater requirements, and parks requirements. As of right now, there was a process through the prior DC study that went through a number of the policies contained within the local service document. And as of right now, we are maintaining those similar policies for this round. If there is something, to discuss, happy enough to open that dialogue. But for the purposes of the background study and as released, we are maintaining the same policies that were introduced in the 2019 background study. This schematic, again, this is just more for illustrative purposes, just demonstrates typically what would be included in a local service policy versus, what would be in the DC. Again, this is illustrative, and it is subject to each municipality and how they address and write their local service policy. But at the outset, at a high level, you can see here mostly if it's on the water side, if it's supply, treatment, storage, again to a broader area, that would be more of a DC. If it's more of a localized water main or maybe a pumping station that is simply just to service that one subdivision, then potentially that would be a local service policy. And this type of framework could be applied again to water, roads, parks and recreation, etc. Now, in terms of the specific policies for the bylaw, again, this is draft right now. It is for consideration. But there's a number of exemptions that need to be adhered to, and they are written within the bylaw. So, for example, with all the mandatory exemptions, I won't touch upon all of this. I think I talked about it earlier, especially going through the Bill 23 stuff. But in terms of the other exemptions that need to be adhered to, we have the upper and lower tier governments and school boards. So if the region were to construct a building, they don't pay a city DC. Likewise, if the city were to construct the facility, they don't pay the regional DC. And then school boards, they're higher in the pecking order from the province, so they don't pay the DCs as well. Industrial buildings, there is an enlargement exemption clause that is extended from the Development Charge Act and into the bylaw. So existing buildings could expand up to 50%. Of their footprint and not pay a development charge, subject to certain conditions. I mentioned already the intensification clauses and as well as all the other mandatory exemptions on this list. Now, in terms of discretionary exemptions, this is where municipalities and council have the ability to add on any exemptions that they see fit. So, for example, they can elect to either reduce or reduce in part or whole a development charge rate, perhaps for different types or classes of development. So, for example, if they wanted to exempt all of churches, they can add that as an exemption, or maybe perhaps exempt or even discount industrial. Again, that is something that municipalities are allowed to do. You may phase in a charge over time. If there is a significant increase to a charge, a council may elect to phase in the increase over a set period. But as well, Bill 23 has introduced the mandatory phase-in of that 80, 85, 90. So there is a phase-in component already included. But if council elects to do any further phase-ins, they're allowed to do that as well. And then lastly, the redevelopment credits. This is not noted within the Development Charge Act, but it is cited through case law, where if there is redevelopment, there should be a period of time allowed where development charges would not have to be payable. So, for example, knock on wood, if your house burnt down or if it was demolished, you should have a period of time to be able to reconstruct it and not pay a DC. And this ranges anywhere from 36 months up to maybe 5-6 years, depending on a bylaw. As well, there's also redevelopment. So, for example, you had one single detached home. You want to put, let's say, 3 townhomes. Then you get a credit for that single detached home. So let's use simple figures. Let's assume a single detached home is $10,000, and a multiple or a townhouse is $5,000. Then the payable would be $15,000, but since because 3 townhomes times 5, there's the 15. But then the credit then should be, well, there was an existing home that would have been paid $10,000, so really 15 minus the 10, so really the net payable would be 5. So again, there is that credit as well that is included in the development charge bylaws. The list here that you are seeing on the screen is the proposed discretionary exemptions for council's consideration. These have been included as part of the DC background study, the draft bylaw. So, and most of these have been extensions or continuations from the last DC in 2019. So, if not all of them. So the hospital for public, so again, a hospital, a place of worship, agricultural and farm uses, temporary buildings and structures, Again, building structures related to classrooms, again, for if you're under the Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities Act, those would be exempt. And then as well, the developments of brownfields may be eligible up to 100% DC exemption, depending on meeting certain eligibility and criteria, as noted within the body. Now, in terms of the capital program, the rates and the proposed rates as part of this DC study, I just want to at least overview the assumptions that took place as part of this background study. So, as discussed earlier through Vlad's slides, we used 2 planning horizons for the background study. So we had a shorter term, 2024, to essentially the regional OP build out, regional OP forecasts. And then we also have that longer term build out forecast, which takes a look at the land fabric and the potential developable lands within the city. So with that being said, for the services related to transportation, so you're related to a highway, public works, water, wastewater, those have been examined using that longer term forecast. Again, in association with staff, we developed a capital project listing requirements in order to service those development lands. And then for other services such as fire, parks and recreation, and library, again, there are some master plans that they have some, older master plans that do require updates, and the updates would be forthcoming. So until that time, they truly don't embrace that longer term planning horizon. So we've utilized that regional OP target for those particular services. Again, just looking at the infrastructure related to the growth forecasts in these time periods. Now, in terms of the key drivers for the capital program, for the most part, there are a lot of projects that were identified through the prior DC study that, if they weren't constructed yet, then, we've updated their cost estimates to take a look at perhaps, tender prices or any indexing, where possible, in terms of maybe perhaps utilizing the inflation rates from Stats Canada that we also utilize for the DC study. With respect to the longer term forecast, looking at build out, we did work with staff to identify new capital to accommodate those build out of lands. Again, so that's really more with your roads, public works, and then water and wastewater. In terms of the capital program, we've summarized it here by service. The details of it are within the background study. So I encourage you to take a look at Chapter 5, which actually has a breakdown of each service. But essentially, if you look at it, in an aggregate sense, we have about $251 million worth of capital identified over the 2 time horizons. Again, the ones above are looking at that shorter term forecast to the OP target. And then the ones starting at the services related to highway down to the wastewater services, those are all based on build out. So, with that being said, there is some post-period benefit to some of the shorter-term forecasts, particularly with library. And then we have a number of benefits to existing deductions. So again, this is with us going through line by line, trying to determine what would be benefiting the existing community relative to what would be growth-related. So we identified another $73 million worth of deductions that should really be attributed to benefiting the existing residents and businesses. So with that being said, the net DC amount that we are including in the calculation is about $176 million, of which we've allocated between residential. So that's to the tune of about $143 million. And then in terms of non-residential, that's about just under $33 million. Just looking at the city's current development charge rates, if we look at a development with full servicing, so that's the second subtotal at the bottom, we're looking at roughly $24,700 for a single detached home. So $22,300 is coming from your municipal-wide services, and then another $2,400 with respect to water and wastewater. As the unit type, changes, there's a different persons per unit that occupy those homes. So the charge, decreases based on that factor. So once we go left to right to a multiple, which is more your townhomes, that drops to about 16,345. Apartments, whether it's 2 bedrooms plus or less than, or 1 bedroom and less, that's about $16,000 and $9,800 respectively. And then we also have a charge for special care, special dwelling. So these are more your, your long-term, your special homes, non-private homes for, say, seniors as well as those that require a bit of a special care. So we typically do that on a per bed or per person basis, and that's reflected there at that $88. And then the non-res right now, it is separated into 2 charges. With commercial institutional, it's about $11.09. And then with respect to industrial, it's about $3.67. And then furthermore, there is a special area-specific rate for developments within Rolling Meadows. And this is in particular with their wastewater infrastructure that they're putting in. So that's another, again, anywhere from $284 to $100, depending on the size or type of the unit. So they would pay in addition to the municipal-wide and the urban rate. In terms of the calculated charges, so again, based on recovering that $175 million of capital, looking at that longer-term forecast, you can see the charges are very similar. So in terms of the municipal-wide plus urban, we're looking at about $25,000 for a single detached home, again for full services, $17,500 for townhomes and multiples, apartments $16,300, and then the smaller apartments at $10,600. And then with respect to the special care, special dwelling, again very similar, just over that $8,800 mark. With respect to the non-residential calculations, for this round, we have combined the commercial, institutional, and industrial charge. So at a combined rate, that would represent $8.67. Now, if council elects to separate this out into into industrial versus commercial, institutional, we could provide an addendum to provide those rates as well. But at a cursory level, just for those of you in the room, that rate would pretty much align with what is currently provided now. I believe there's just a little bit of an uptick on the industrial side, but the commercial, for the most part, will be within that $11 range as well. And then in terms of the Rolling Meadows, again, that has been recalculated. So the charges here, again, very similar. So with that being said, just want to provide you a little bit of a comparison, because I think it'll be a little bit easier when you see it all on the same page. As you can see right now, for a grand total for the municipal-wide plus the urban, you're currently at $24,717. So this proposed rates, with looking at all the infrastructure that's required to that build-out, we're looking at about $25,042. So roughly, just about a $300 difference between the two periods. And then looking at Rolling Meadows again, there have been some progress with those with that wastewater, so that's gone down slightly from 284 to 211. As I mentioned, with Bill 23, we would have to phase this in for now. Again, Bill 185 has no status currently, so we are working with the information we have. So if that $25,000 were to be, passed by council, then the first day that the bylaw is in effect, really that phase-in would be $20,033, and that would be effective for a whole year. In terms of the non-residential charge, again, I apologize for the notation here, but that current, really, this is for the commercial institutional, again at $11.09. Looking at it from a holistic one non-residential charge for the whole city, it's about $8.67. So alternatively, if you look at that, $3.67, again, that would bump up to that $8.67 as well. However, if there is the appetite to separate these out, again, we could provide those rates as well. And in terms of the phase-in, that $8.67 would actually be $7 and a penny with the 80%. And then finally, again, comes to the close of my presentation, but a little bit of a survey for the single detached dwellings. So you can see here, these are all the municipalities within Niagara region. Again, I think that's a good comparator here. I didn't want to inundate the list with municipalities all over Ontario. I think that would just be almost impossible to read. But at least with the neighbors here, you can see that the current rates right now, that is noted in the blue. Where we're calculating would be in the green. However, again, with the with the phase-in of the rates, we will be dropping down slightly to that 80%, which is in the red. The ones that you're noting in the star, these are municipalities that are currently undertaking or at least implementing their development charge bylaws. So with Lincoln right now, I mean, they passed, I believe, about 2 weeks ago. Pelham, they released their study, but I think there's some further refinements there, but this is based on their released background study. And then as well, all the other municipalities, Grimsby, West Lincoln, Port Colborne, these are all updating, at least in the foreseeable future. In terms of the non-residential commercial, as I mentioned, the current is in the blue. And then, with the green, that's where we're going in terms of the calculated. And then the red is with the 80% phase-in. And again, this is now with the blended charge. In terms of industrial, again, with the blue, that's the current. This would align you then just going just above Port Colborne and Niagara on the Lake. Now in terms of next steps, again, we'd welcome the feedback, any comments that you may have. We are still working with staff just to refine, maybe perhaps some of the items within the background, within the bylaw. But for the most part, what you're seeing within the background study is what is going to be presented to council. There may be some refinements, perhaps, let's say, with definitions, but really that's more aligning, with the regional bylaws as well. So there is no change in the actual charge itself. It's just more, for greater clarity and interpretation of the bylaw. So with that being said, we are looking for the mandatory public meeting on May 7th, and then the consideration of the bylaw on May 28th. And that concludes my presentation. Any questions? Or back to staff.
At this point, are there any questions either online or from our in-person attendees? Pardon me? For the online folks, if you could please raise your hand. Okay, I guess there's nothing. Thank you very much for participating, and we look forward to hearing from you if you have any additional comments. If not, our public meeting of council will be on at the next council meeting, May the 8th. Thank you.
$1,500.
Yeah. So in terms of the calculated, sorry, would you like the calculator or the current?
The current.
Okay. So the current development charges for apartments for the 2+ bedrooms appears here as $15,959 with full services.
And the 1-bedroom / bachelor studio is $17,500.
9,761.
Sorry, 9,000 is the current.
Yes.
And the proposed is.
10,594.
Oh, okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah.
Come June 1st, I believe it was Bill 185. If that comes into implementation with attainable / affordable housing, is that 100% development free?
Based on how the initial read of the act and the proposed regulations, yes, 100% exempt.
So that would supersede anything that's discussed today or that goes forward in front of council?
Yeah, so I mean, that's something where we are keeping staff and, the municipality apprised, because depending on how it's rolled out, it would make a change, and effectively it could potentially supersede whatever is being discussed here.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks again, and I guess we'll conclude the meeting at this point.